Good evening, class. Today we're going to be talking about persuasive speaking. So as an overview, we're going to talk about the basics of persuasive speaking. We're going to go over an activity that you guys are going to do together, and then we'll do your exit ticket and do some 1 to 5 hand signals, just kind of so I get an idea of how you're feeling about the lesson and how you feel about your understanding on it. So that's what we're going to do today. I ask that you guys just stay engaged, get excited, because the activity is kind of fun, and we are going to work together. You're going to get a broad overview of persuasive speaking and be able to apply that as well. So that's the goal for today. For the basics of persuasive speaking, we first must ask ourselves, what is persuasion? So for starters, persuasion is essentially the act of persuading someone to do or act or believe something that they wouldn't have already done. And persuasive speaking is sometimes similar to informative speaking in that it does review findings, but for persuasive speeches, you are making judgments about which findings are accurate. So for persuasive speeches, you might think of people arguing about politics or what to eat for dinner or what movie to go see, or you're persuading someone to choose you, maybe in an election, or choose a product that you recommend. These are all types of persuasion. And most persuasive speeches concern questions of fact, value, or policy. And that's something that you would consider when you are articulating your persuasive argument of which version are you trying to do? What is your main concern? As you'll see here, is it a concern of fact, value, or policy? And what are you trying to do in your persuasive speech? Are you trying, like I said, to get someone to change their opinion on something, or are you trying to get them to do something specific, something tangible? Either way, you need to keep that in mind when you're articulating your argument, because that will inform the way that you go about constructing your speech. So for more information on questions of fact, value, or policy, issues of fact are similar to informative speeches in that, like I said, they review findings. The difference, as I said, is that they are going to determine which findings are accurate and then present that to the audience in a way that is easily understandable, easily applicable. Issues of value tackle the time-honored question of what is good, right, or beautiful. Obviously, these values can be very individualistic or community-based or nationally held, and sometimes do have some clashing. So some of that you'll have to anticipate in those type of speeches, in those type of persuasive arguments. Issues of policy concern what action should be taken to resolve a particular problem. Policy questions, they talk about a problem and they talk about a solution. So usually in those, you're going to articulate what the problem is and how you would suggest fixing it. And that's going to try to persuade the audience to move through some of those questions they may have through understanding and listening to your speech. Some typical things you need to make sure you're aware of as you are articulating the goal of your speech. What do you want the audience to do? As a speaker, again, you need to ask yourself that. If you want the audience to sign a petition, write their legislator, boycott a product, talk to their friends, buy a certain product, or take some other tangible action, you need to make sure you are aware of that, because you definitely want to include that in your conclusion, really hit home on that at the end of your speech, make that call to action as you conclude your speech, and remind the audience what you're asking them to do, and kind of leave them with those parting words and those parting moments as you are kind of articulating, like I said, the whole point of the persuasive speech. So that's just a small overview of the basics here. What is persuasion? What are you trying to do in your speech? And you can ask yourself, is it a concern of fact, value, or policy? More with persuasive speaking, the basics, you're going to look at, how do you consider the audience, and what are nonverbal cues that you should be aware of, and anticipated skepticism. So for starters, how do you consider the audience? Persuasive speaking is very connected to the audience because you must, in a sense, meet the audience halfway. Persuasion obviously is not entirely controlled by the speaker. Persuasion occurs when an audience assents to what a speaker says, if you are doing it accurately and effectively. Consequently, though, persuasion speakers require extra attention to audience analysis. So that kind of leads us into those nonverbal cues. But I will say traditionally persuasion involves ethos, which is credibility, logos, logic, and pathos, emotion. By performing these 3 elements competently, a speaker can enhance their persuasive power. This is something, when you have conviction in your words, your audience is more aware and more susceptible to your message. And, when you are doing these persuasive speakers, you need to recognize that the audience is constantly processing what you're saying. Nonverbal reactions are common for an audience listening to a persuasive speech. And if I were to ask you right now to name some nonverbal reactions in communication, you might say furrowed brow, nodding head, rolling eyes. These all can be signals that an audience member either likes or dislikes what you're saying. And acknowledging these nonverbal reactions can help a speaker, explain more in detail certain points. If you see people are not understanding what you're saying, they're just looking at you like, okay, are you done here? You can stop, you can reassess, you can kind of engage a little bit more, you can, explain a little bit more, maybe explain it in a different way, even simplify if needed. So another thing about audiences and how you should consider them is you need to identify your target audience. In almost any persuasive speaking situation, there's a subset of the audience that agrees with you, that disagrees with you, and those that are undecided. And when you are trying to articulate your argument, you need to realize that you should probably target the part of the audience that's undecided. That's the goal, right? Because if you are preaching to people who already, preaching to the choir, they already agree with you, that's not necessarily helpful because you're not really having to persuade them of much. Whereas if people automatically disagree with you, maybe don't spend most of your energy on that. Go ahead and target those people who are undecided because those are the people that you can actually persuade. So, like I said, you should focus on that part of the audience. And you also should consider audience's skepticism because this kind of does play a role. You should acknowledge and respond to those objections within the speech. If you are talking to people who, do not really support public education, for example, you can kind of acknowledge that. You could say, yeah, I know your guys' opinion about this is a little different, but I want to give you some more examples of why this is going to be beneficial to your community. Just an example. So, something that you should kind of keep in mind as well is to, look at those anticipated skepticism aspects and be able to incorporate them into your speeches and look at your arguments, look at your nonverbal cues when you're actually doing speaking, and consider the audience and what they bring to you as well. So now we're going to move into an activity time where you are going to work with a partner to do an activity called Defend the Villain. This is something I think is going to be super fun for you, very creative. You are going to work with a partner to choose a very common villain, and you are going to convince us that they're not actually bad or evil. They're just misunderstood and misrepresented. So what you're going to do is work with a partner, like I said, choose your villain. You are going to consider the obvious skepticism that's going to come from your audience and kind of circumvent that and persuade us that they're not actually evil. And this could be creative in a way where you could give us backstory that maybe we don't already know. Use your creative mind here. The sky's the limit. Have fun with it, but keep in mind, like we said, the different versions of persuasive speeches and which kind you're trying to do, and let that inform the way that you construct your argument. So go ahead and pick a partner right now. I want you guys to work on this, and then we'll come back and do a little bit more and talk a little bit more. But go ahead and pick your villain and be prepared to defend them. Now that we've heard from everyone about their villains and you guys have done your exit ticket, which essentially was just showing me that you understood the lesson by summarizing in your own words the takeaways from it. So I appreciate your guys' work on that. And we did our hand signals lesson activity where I kind of asked you guys those questions to have you show me your understanding on, scale of 1 to 5. How are we understanding, this? And I appreciate your guys' participation and your honesty with that. I will take that feedback and let it give information to our next lesson together. And if there are residual things that I need to touch upon, that way everybody's understanding, I will do that at the beginning of next class. So if you look at our wrap up here, we're looking, we talked about what is persuasive speaking and how does it compare to informative speaking. And like I said, you applied this knowledge by defending a villain of your choosing. You showed me your understanding of this lesson by doing the exit ticket, summarizing your own words, and you gave me the indication of your understanding by showing 1 through 5, your various aspects of this lesson and your understanding. So for next time, you're going to read chapter 11 and bring questions from chapter 5 as well. I want you guys to continue to look at persuasive speaking because you will be doing a persuasive speech in this class, and it will be much more involved than the defend the villain activity, but go ahead and keep looking at that. Keep, bringing those questions to class. I appreciate your comments. I appreciate your participation today. And again, please let me know if you have any lasting questions. I'm happy to help. We will take time to make sure that everybody's on board and understanding. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.